First of all, happy Pride Month to those of you who celebrate. And if you don't, why? Okay, time to level up a skill that has been on my radar forever. Now, as an artist, one super underrated but very important skill that you need to know is shape language. No matter what kind of art you do, good shape language is the very basis of good composition and storytelling. However, shape language is not limited to object and character silhouettes. In today's video, I want to look at a more abstract and nuanced aspect of shape language, and that is rendering. When we're painting, we often get so caught up in rendering everything to look really good and realistic that we forget the very fundamentals of how readable the shapes are in the rendering. So in today's video, I want to drill this shape language skill, and I know it's going to be tricky because I know myself, my instinct is going to be over render. So today we're going to add in an extra challenge that this video is all about. We're going to paint only using hard, flat brushes that have no opacity jitter. I'll explain this as we go along, and I really hope you guys give this challenge a go yourselves. If you enjoyed this video and learned something today, please remember to like, subscribe, comment your biggest takeaway from the video. But without much further ado, let's dive into a shape language challenge. Here's the painting that we inked last week. Now, I'm gonna be honest, as we go through this video, you're gonna see some massive changes to this piece. Not so much with the inks, but with the colors and such. But to start off, I made selections and used the fill bucket tool or a large flat inking brush to flat the colors in. You already know I love doing this because it helps me separate every element of the painting to its own layer, and if I lock the alpha, I can also paint within the lines. But if you've watched me paint before, you already know this. I started with very neutral, low saturation colors just to put something down, so let's get into the actual challenge. We're gonna start with the big, bold shapes and then work our way down to the smaller ones. Now, because there is a green accent from the giant monstera leaves, which by the way, I legitimately had a dream where I was propagating monstera plants, but anyway, since we have a large green accent, I wanted some warm red and orange light, at least at the beginning. I started by grabbing a flat marker brush. This is from the Muses brush pack for Critter, which is free to download, and I'll link it down in the description. It's basically a flat oval brush that has no opacity or flow dynamics, but the angle changes based on pen tilt. I legitimately used this brush for all the rendering for this entire painting. For the big lighting blocks, the thing to remember is color fall off. Since we're not using any opacity dynamics, we're definitely not going to blend anything. So all the blending must come from areas of flat colors. So while painting the lights, I had to make sure that I was creating gradated steps going from the bright white light to yellow to orange and finally to brown for the floors. I wanted this character to have paler skin and blonde hair, which of course changed in the end product, but because the light is going to hit her from behind, we need to think about where the blocks of light will appear on her skin and hair. For the moment, I wasn't trying to use more than 2 or 3 midtones, just trying to block in as much of the light and shadow as possible. This step is a huge reason why I wanted to even try this challenge out in the first place. A lot of the times when I'm painting normally with opacity jitter and such, I tend to go straight in with a bunch of hue shifts and loads of colors and values, which, you know, is one way to do it and works great for neutral beauty lighting type portraits. But as I'm sure you've noticed from last month's series, I've kind of been veering towards a more dramatically lit style of portrait. And in order for light to appear dramatic, it needs to read well, even from a distance. One important thing to remember with readability is the planes on the surface. With our character, for instance, which planes of her face, body, and hair are going to receive direct light, which ones indirect, and which ones get no light at all. As you can see, my brush radius is pretty large at this stage because remember, our focus so far has been on creating large, broad brush strokes with as few color variations as possible. But now that we have the big planes in place, it is time to add dimension. If I'm being honest, I feel like I made my job here unnecessarily difficult by not having a palette of colors and midtones to color pick from, because this step is all about creating all those extra midtones that are going to make some areas look rounder because we're painting in some transitions. It's still going to be hard-edged flat shapes, but what we're going to do is smooth out that tension between the highlight and shadow. Like I said, I did make my job significantly harder by not just using like a skin tone sphere that I could color pick from, but instead I ended up kind of visually choosing colors based on the hue, saturation, and value of the adjacent tones. This to me feels like a more traditional way of picking colors, kind of like how you would mix oil paint on a palette before putting it on the canvas, except the palette is the color picker widget. As you can tell, I started with the face just because I knew the skin would have the softest color transitions in the scene. Still using the same brush, I started by creating a singular transition midtone between the highlight and shadow, then created more midtone on either side of that color, and so on until I had about 6 or so midtones going from highlight all the way to the shadow. I then gave the hair similar treatment, except because her hair has some curl to it, we're not going to be too fussed about making every transition super smooth. We just need the hair to feel cohesive as a unit. The leaves got some midtones as well, and I'm gonna be honest, I actually quite enjoyed painting the leaves, much to my mum's delight, I'm sure. She's been after me forever to paint planty, flowery subjects, and I've always said no because I prefer drawing humans, but you know what? This is fun. The part that the plant is in is rounded and smooth, so there we're going to have more midtones to kind of create that roundness as well. Now, bear in mind, we're not actually rendering it to be super smooth transitions, we are still using very flat shapes. However, because these transitions have so many narrow layers of colors that gradually get darker, it appears to be a smooth transition, especially when compared to the other not so smooth areas of the painting. I also then decided to go about making the first of many color changes, just using the levels and hue sat menus to change things up. I'm gonna be honest, the color palette felt too drab for my liking, and her skin and hair were too dark for what I had in mind for her character, but now let's go in and refine things. So this is the stage where our brush radius is the smallest it has been so far in the process. With our largest and medium shapes in place, we can now start to get most of the little details sorted. Now, since we have a lot of values and hues in place already, we can simply color pick as a start and make any minor adjustments that we need to in order to smooth some bits out and add texture to other bits. My favorite example here is doing the upper arm. It currently looks like an absolute mess, so what I did was think about the anatomy, but also how the underlying musculature is often smoothed over by a thick layer of skin. So yes, we will have some form shadows, but we're also going to use intermediate tones to soften out that transition, making those shadows look a little less crazy and intense. By far the longest part at this stage of the painting was doing the hair. Because she has some serious waves, we do need that texture, but we also want it to feel soft and like she actually takes care of it. Because she has a monstera, those need a lot of attention, so she's definitely a nurturer. Plus, as a newly initiated plant lady myself, I can tell you that taking care of plants has encouraged me to take care of my own body even more. So yeah, anyway, this bit was definitely some standard legwork, but without any texture or blender brushes. Just a lot of color picking, a relatively small brush, and some patience. However, keep in mind how many details we've just painted, because you're probably gonna hate me for the next and final step. It is now time to do the hardest thing any artist has to do. It is time to paint over a lot of that hard work that we've just put in, because we're making it full circle back to the original intent of this entire process: readability. Now, normally I do this bit with a pressure opacity brush, so some of that detail would still show through, but today is as much a mental challenge as it is a physical one. I'm gonna go in and start to simplify some areas of excessive color noise. So as you can see, I started with the hair because it was way too detailed for something that is supposed to look soft and well cared for. So at this stage, I'm going through and finding places where I feel it is too textured to look right, and then I grabbed a local color there and painted in larger flat shapes like we did at the very beginning of this video, but a little more nuanced this time around. In fact, I'm paying way more attention to how the shapes themselves follow the forms of each wave in the hair, rather than just painting some random blocks of color. And at this stage, I still wasn't in love with the palette, so I did more hue shifts and such, and then it was time to simplify the skin. Just like the hair, we want the skin to look supple, at least for this character in particular, and since we can't blend, we're gonna have to make do by using larger flat shapes of mid-tone instead. Again, we're gonna try and be nuanced about this because we don't want to lose all the form and dimension in the anatomy. Placing these large shapes is an intuitive process, but that's not helpful to hear, so here's the system that I followed. I only really painted large flat shapes with mid-tone, never with highlight or shadows. I found this helped preserve enough detail at the two ends of the value spectrum so it doesn't look completely flat, but still has some of that smoothness in the mid-tone. And I didn't flatten out all of the mid-tones to a single color, but rather used some basic anatomy and composition. Where do we want to show the most detail? To me, that's the face. So that means the arms and legs need to not take up so much attention. So the skin on the limbs is going to get the flattened treatment. On the face itself, where do I want the attention to be focused on? The eyes and the center of the face, i.e. the forehead, nose and mouth. So the expendable areas are the temples, the cheeks and the jaw. Those places also got the flattened treatment. I did do more hue and level changes, and this is definitely not the very final version of the painting, but here's a couple of other things that I learned through this challenge. First off, I learned just how much I've been dependent on blenders, both traditionally and digitally, to pick my midtones. Here's why that's a bad habit. Blending two colors together doesn't add a third more interesting midtone, it just adds a mix of the two colors. Okay, that sounded dumb, let me explain. When we painted midtones for the skin today, you may have noticed that rather than just going halfway between the highlight and shadow, I actually felt the urge to hue shift and add a more saturated, lively color in between. Now, I'd imagine if using the opacity jitter was an option today, it would also lead to even more fun colors that you wouldn't normally throw in. So this was definitely a pretty big color picking exercise too. The other big lesson for me, and I don't know if you guys struggle with this too, but this exercise helped me to go back to the more traditional painting approach of giving every object the same treatment. Having spent the last several years only painting digitally, I've kind of gotten used to using certain techniques on certain parts of the painting. So for instance, the skin gets painted with lots of color picking and blender brushes, while the clothes usually just have some chalk brush textured action. And for the background, I usually find shortcuts in textured and stamp brushes. So in my mind, certain objects get painted certain ways. Is that a bad thing? Yes and no. It is definitely way more efficient to have certain routines that help you paint specific textures and forms quickly and easily, but at the same time, it can also make your painting feel a little disjointed, if that makes sense. Sometimes I feel like I need to apply overall filters just to make everything fit into the scene, and I don't love the idea of over-processing a painting more than is necessary. So painting everything by hand using the same brush and very few digital tricks definitely brought me back to traditional art times where everything had to be given the same exact treatment by default because you are limited by the medium. All in all, I hated this process because I hate change in general, but it was a necessary challenge to remind me of what the very motions of painting everything by hand feel like, and I definitely encourage you guys to try it out, especially if you've been painting digitally for far too long like I have. Alright, so what do you guys think of the end product? I'll definitely be going in and rendering it just so it matches the style of my other paintings, but this was definitely a really fun exercise into intuitive painting, but a little more conscious, a little more thinking before putting down the colors. Did you learn something new today? Will you be trying this challenge out? Let me know in the comments below, and if you did learn something fun today and enjoy this video, please remember to give it a big thumbs up and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss a future upload on this channel. You can grab yourself some custom brushes that I've made myself and I use every single week on every single painting. I'll leave a link up here to my Gumroad shop, and thank you so much for your support. Come say hi on Instagram and Discord, and if you enjoyed this video, you'll enjoy this one down here where we worked on another skill, line art. There's loads you'll learn from that video, I promise, so make sure you go check that out. But that's about all I have to say today, so thank you so much for hanging out with me. I really hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Bye!